Have you ever seen an old American sedan, the kind with faded paint and a tired interior, still gliding down the highway at 70 miles an hour, as if time had no effect on it? Pop the hood and you'll often find one of the most unassuming but legendary engines ever built in the United States, the Buick 3800 V6. It was never the most powerful, never the prettiest, but it earned a reputation for being nearly impossible to kill. That's why mechanics and drivers across America gave it a strange but fitting nickname, the Cockroach Engine. The story of this engine began in the early 1960s. Buick had tried its hand at a small aluminum V8, but the project was expensive, unreliable, and lost out to cheaper Chevrolet and Ford engines. Instead of continuing the fight, Buick went back to basics and developed something simpler, cheaper, and more efficient, a V6. In 1962, they introduced the Fireball V6 at 198 cubic inches. A few years later, the displacement grew to 225, and by the mid-70s, it had returned to Buick in 231 cubic inch form after GM bought back the tooling from Jeep. The timing was perfect. The oil crisis had forced Americans to look for engines that were smaller and more fuel efficient, and Buick's E6 became the right engine for the right era. Most V6 engines are designed at a 60-degree angle for balance and smoothness, but Buick built theirs at 90 degrees, reusing V8 tooling and saving costs. This gave the engine a slightly rough idle, but also a huge advantage in torque. It had a cast iron block and heads, a simple pushrod design, and thick cylinder walls. It wasn't flashy, but it was tough, and it was easy to maintain. That rugged design laid the foundation for a reputation that would grow for decades. The Buick 3800 went through several important generations. The late 80s brought the LN3, which added a balance shaft, on-center bores, and electronic fuel injection, delivering around 165 horsepower with much better refinement. In the early 90s came the first true 3800 Series I, with electronic controls and an optional supercharged version that made family sedans surprisingly quick. The Series II, from 1995 to 2003, was lighter, more efficient, and offered about 200 horsepower in naturally aspirated form and 240 horsepower with the Eaton supercharged L67. It became the most celebrated version, known for strong torque, decent fuel economy, and an easy 200,000 miles of service life. Even when problems did appear, like intake manifold gasket leaks or valve cover oil seepage, the fixes were simple and cheap. The Series 3 carried the torch from 2004 to 2008 with stronger internal parts, aluminum intake components, returnless fuel injection, better sensors, and in the supercharged L32, a more advanced Gen 5 blower and electronic throttle. These engines delivered smooth, instant torque that made sedans like the Buick Park Avenue Ultra or Pontiac Grand Prix GTP feel like hidden performance cars. What really set the 3800 apart was not just its strength, but its balance of power and efficiency. Naturally aspirated versions could hit 30 miles per gallon on the highway, something almost unheard of for a six-cylinder engine in the 1990s. The supercharged versions could still manage respectable economy if driven gently, but when you pressed the gas, they delivered instant torque that made even big Buicks and Pontiacs feel surprisingly quick. For tuners, it was a dream engine. Simple pulley swaps, intake and exhaust upgrades, and a computer tune could easily push it into the 300-350 horsepower range while keeping it street-friendly. You could find the 3800 everywhere. It powered Buicks like the LeSabre, Regal, and Park Avenue, Pontiacs like the Bonneville and Grand Prix, Chevrolets like the Monte Carlo and Impala, and even Oldsmobiles. It became the workhorse for family sedans, luxury cruisers, taxi fleets, and even police cars because it could handle constant abuse while staying affordable to maintain. Mechanics loved it because it rarely needed serious work, and when it did, repairs were simple. Owners loved it because it just kept running. Stories of 300,000-mile Buicks that still fired up every morning became the norm, and that is exactly why it became the Cockroach Engine. Like a cockroach, it simply refused to die. So why was it discontinued? The answer wasn't reliability, but changing times. By the mid-2000s, stricter emissions rules and consumer demand for modern dual overhead cam engines made the old pushrod design outdated. GM needed global engines that could be shared across markets, and the 3800 didn't fit the strategy anymore. In 2008, after more than 25 million units built, production ended quietly at Flint, Michigan. It wasn't a failure that killed it, but progress. Even though production ended over 15 years ago, the Buick 3800 is still alive today. Enthusiasts swap them into Fieros, kit cars, and hot rods, tuners build them into drag machines, and thousands of old sedans with peeling paint and sagging doors are still running on their original engines. It may not sit in a museum, but its legacy is on the road, in garages, and in the memories of drivers who trusted it without question. The Buick 3800 wasn't designed to be glamorous. It wasn't meant to win races or be a halo engine, but it was the engine that kept America moving, day after day, year after year. That's why it will always be remembered as the Cockroach Engine. Tough, efficient, easy to fix, and nearly impossible to kill. If you've ever owned a car with the 3800 under the hood, share your story in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around because more forgotten legends of automotive history are coming soon.